Big companies and personalities, they want to come back into Indonesia because the Indonesian economy is really gaining momentum.
So, a warm welcome to Terje Nilsen, who's the co-founder and CEO of Seven Stones Indonesia.
Thank you.
Chairman of the Nordic Council Indonesia and representative of Norway Connect. Terje is from Norway and he's been living in Indonesia now for well over 20 years. He was co-owner and CEO of the Paradise Property Group for 10 years and led the company to great success. His leadership, drive and knowledge are recognised across many industries, and his unrivaled network of high-level contacts in government and business spans the globe. Terje speaks English, Indonesian and Norwegian, and hopefully we're going to do this interview in English. Terje, welcome.
Thank you. That's all right with me. I think I do speak English.
It helps. I think our audience would appreciate that. So we're going to start out really by looking at the year that's been, or the couple of years it's been, and where the future lies, really. So it's been a challenging year or two for us in Bali for both tourism and real estate investments. But on some aspects, it's positive to see how Indonesia is waking up to this enormous potential. So what are your feelings on what's gone and what's likely to happen?
Well, I guess from our side and Bali in general, Indonesia in general, the whole world that had some challenges, obviously because of COVID and lockdowns and difficulties in terms of travel and so on. For us, it's been quite the opposite for many reasons, and business has been better than ever. For Indonesia, I think too that we wouldn't say that COVID has been a blessing in disguise, because obviously it's a bad thing, and some people have lost their beloved ones and lives because of this. But it's also created a situation, I think, where Indonesia has had to fast track a few of the changes and regulations, omnibus law, other regulations supporting and inviting for foreign investment and also domestic investment. So I think we've seen a very positive speed up of actions and passing of all these regulations. When we look at the overall situation for Indonesia too economically compared to the rest of the world, Indonesia is probably coming through COVID in a much better way than most other countries, and traditionally Indonesia leans into their sort of huge domestic economy and also their agriculture and so on, and I think we can now see the trend of Indonesia lifting up and coming out, sort of moving up the ladder of a large economy that might go from the 8th largest to the 7th largest, and some of the latest surveys that has been done in the past have concluded that Indonesia will be the 4th largest economy by 2050, I think it was, and some think now it'll happen already to 2030 because of COVID, and obviously not only Indonesia moving forward, but some other economies has already been impacted.
There's an aspect to that would say that this decade is going to be the year of, or the decade of Asia in terms of like replacing global geopolitical powers and all that sort of thing?
I think that's already happening. If we look at shift of wealth and growth, Asia is already on that path to be the next sort of power area. And I think Indonesia is positioning itself in a very, very good way with that. It's starting to take much more space internationally, but it's taking space in a nice and positive way. It's not making any choices. There's political pressure from US, probably also China, to sort of try to move Indonesia one way or another, but they have a tradition of staying neutral in those aspects, and have said recently too politically that they do want to stay neutral. And I think for investors and economical aspects, that's actually an inviting part, that it isn't depending on the sort of China or US, Australia sort of block happening. And because of that, foreign companies sees it as a very viable economy. In addition to obviously the already known aspects, it's a rich country. It's got a lot of natural resources, young population, and a lot of potential starting to really emerge. Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk recently, actually, about that young population, and in terms of how it's being geared towards a digital future. There's a lot of a lot of startups that are happening in Indonesia. In fact, one of Indonesia's most famous and sort of prolific startups has been Gojek, for example, and Gojek have just gone into bed with Tokopedia and Traveloka, and it's worth billions of dollars, which is really encouraging. I think if you're a kid here wanting to see where your future is going to be, and there's a digital future.
Yeah, I think in terms of size, we already see that Indonesia, in terms of the market size in Southeast Asia, is already 50% plus of the market. And Indonesia, I think the government, they realize fully that potential, and they're trying to encourage that. And I think it's very encouraging for the younger generation to see that they're living in a country that slowly is stepping up to be a regional leader in that sense. And you see, like you said, the pop-ups of different communities and startups and companies coming in for that particular purpose to find these talented kids and give them opportunities to develop their ideas and concept forward. So I think that's a trend and a tipping point that we'll see escalate further and further. There's a lot of talk now from Nordic countries that we deal a lot with, and also other countries, with Indonesia and the sort of digital trend and technology, and so they want to get in and take part of that. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that you mentioned earlier on there was the omnibus law, and that's when we first started to write about that. Couple of years ago, maybe more. It was something that we were simply talking about, but now it's been ratified, right? So what are the sort of immediate implications of the omnibus law for us as a business and for any other business, really, particularly in Bali? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the omnibus law was passed by the National Assembly and the President late 2020, and through 2021 we've seen almost all of it being implemented or attempted to be implemented. It may have been a little bit of too much too quick to a sense where the bureaucracy and the regencies and provinces isn't fully up to speed with the change. But I think overall that's a growing pain and a sort of process that Indonesia needs to go through, and is actually doing tremendously fast and encouraging. And I think we see what we kind of seen for the last few years, that the central government has been very service-minded in how they reach out to investors, how they reach out to the world in terms of attracting foreign investment, and also get domestic investment going in a better way. That is now big time also happening in the provinces and the regency government. So there's a totally different vibe in how they deal with challenges, requests for different regulation challenges and so on. It's still an ongoing process, and there's still quite a few questions to be answered, I guess. But for us here in Bali and also overall Indonesia, I think the general sort of advice that we give and can give is that, take advantage of the opportunity, move forward. You might have to do some adjustments as you go along, and they may have some minor cost to it, but it's better to take advantage of the momentum and move forward. So in short, I think it's a lot easier to deal with the government. It's a lot easier to get clarity in regulations. You feel more
with the OSS things, the online single submissions.
Yeah, so everything gets centralized into one system, and we have to realize that it's an enormous amount of data that these systems have to process, and they have to connect with the immigration system, the different departments, permits, and so on and so on. So there is some growing pains, but to me it's overall very, very positive. And when we look at the time frame of all of this happening, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, is the because it's something that we're kind of writing a bit about right now, the tax amnesty. Is the latest tax amnesty a part of this omnibus law rollout, or is that a separate issue?
separate issue from Omnibus. Omnibus has quite a few tax aspects to it in general for companies wanting to invest, being domestic or foreign. You know, there's different types of tax holidays depending on the size and the industry, and again IT and other aspects that Indonesia wants to encourage. The tax amnesty, there, as we know, there was one launched in 2017 and there's one being launched now, which I think is motivated to maybe 2017 it wasn't totally prepared or matured in the whole tax system and the exposure to possibly Indonesians and Indonesian companies holding assets both domestically and abroad. And the Indonesian government moving forward has probably got more indications and agreements with countries who's been known to maybe hold some of that assets like Singapore, Switzerland and so on. So I guess they want to take advantage of that situation to try to push these big client or persons and companies into compliance.
I caught something, I think yesterday or the day before, about how much has actually already been declared in this latest tax amnesty. So from January the 1st to date, it's a substantial amount of money already. Is there like a target that they would be, that the government would be happy with to have achieved?
I'm sure they have a target to work with, and whether that is going to be achieved or not will remain to be seen, I guess. But definitely the momentum is different from many ways. In some aspects, the sort of percentage of the tax amnesty, what you have to pay when you declare asset, is a bit higher than last time. But I think the pressure is on, both with the fact that what we talked about, that the government is aware of where they are, and also different wind, different drive. Some of these players and big companies and personalities, they want to come back into Indonesia because the Indonesian economy is really gaining momentum. So that encourages them to declare this and take it home and put the money back into the Indonesian economy.
I mean, the aspect of foreign direct investment, FDIs, how connected is that with some of the trade agreements that were recently signed? The EFTA, the CEPA agreement with Australia. Are those platforms to encourage foreign direct investment, or is the idea of foreign direct investment, Joe Blow coming in from New York or from London or from Rome with a pile of money wanting to put it into Indonesia? How connected is that with the agreement?
I think it's an overall drive forward from the Indonesian government to I use the word normalize, and open up on a big scale and put in place these different mechanisms. So the omnibus law is set to sort of govern and caretake and create benefits for end investors, maybe more than anything domestic, but obviously also the FDI or the foreign investments gets impacted and encouraged as well. The trade agreement is part of that process, but separate to the omnibus, in the sense that Indonesia has done, I think it's 14 or 15 different trade agreements. The biggest one is probably with Australia, because it's a natural close by partner and a lot of trade going on, and I can see a lot of happening stuff going on in between Indonesia and Australia, from the G2G and down to B2B, and the interaction between the different governments to encourage their different businesses to cross-invest and take advantage of it. The other major one is probably then EFTA, which is Switzerland, Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, maybe not the biggest economies except for Switzerland, but it's already showing encouraging signs, and Indonesia now and European Union is also talking to each other again after a few political sort of hiccups over the last few years on putting that back on track. So that makes it easier. It removes trade barriers, different types of taxes depending on what kind of product it is and so on. As an example, with maybe Norway and Indonesia, Norway is a big exporter of fish. Indonesia wants to become that, so it creates a much better platform to grow and develop those relationships.
I mean, on a more sort of micro level, what's happened over the last couple of years with COVID and lockdowns and travel restrictions and that sort of stuff, because we're kind of primarily based here in Bali, the impact of that has been pretty significant. I mean, we've noticed, you know, not that many foreigners in town anymore, even though I read something yesterday that there's something like, you know, 150,000 expats that are registered in Bali right now, which is quite a large number. But in terms of like potential for Bali's tourism industry to move forward, because, you know, the majority of the economy here has been either directly related to or on the periphery of tourism. What sort of either signs that things are going to move in a different direction or prospects to move in a different direction are there that you see?
Yeah, I think, you know, like you said, it's been devastating in particular for people living from hand to mouth, in the sense that they're paid a salary out of the tourism industry, and suddenly they lost their jobs, and they've had really hard times to you know, survive through these couple of years. I must say though that less of an impact than I thought it would be, you know, with the Balinese, sort of, again, similar to what we see all over Indonesia. They lean into their agriculture, and then they get creative and still survive. And I think that everyone is waking up to that dependency of tourism industry, which might not be the best. So there's a lot of movements to create other income streams, maybe some light industry and so on. But more than anything, personally, I think tourism will come back. I think it'll be, you know, a bit more conscious, a bit more sustainable. People will demand
more quality versus quantity thing that we've spoken a lot about.
Possibly, and I think also that when we were younger, we're still young, but when we were younger, we came to Bali. We would stay for 2-3 weeks, and over the years, that's gone down to 3.7 days in average stay. So I think that will go up, which is good. Clientele maybe a little bit different. That sort of mass tourism with busloads of, you know, different nationalities coming in and running around may be reduced. But what I see with the government is they're realizing, one example, health tourism is a big thing, and they're doing that for a few reasons. One, if you can get people in for treatments to Bali, which I think you can. In particular, I believe in holistic health, because it's easier to position Bali and Indonesia rather than compete against, you know, the sort of established nations. But you can already see now they're starting very soon to build a fantastic hospital out in Sanur. To take up for that, and in addition to then keeping people here longer for possible treatments and so on, it also creates a trust in Indonesia, and in particular Bali, then, that if I do have an accident or a heart attack or whatever, you know, I'm taken care of. The second or third aspect that comes out of that is that if you look at medical tourism in Singapore, 50% of that is Indonesia. If you look at Malaysia, 70% of it is Indonesia. So it's a massive capital flight that they're starting to realize this has to end.
I mean, that's a huge amount of money.
So it's not just foreigners, but also like clients in Jakarta and other places that rather than going to KL or Singapore for medical treatments, they'll go to Bali.
All right, so you know, Bali's tourism industry can recover, but maybe in a modified kind of way, the way they used to, because there's no doubt that the way it was working before, the mass tourism market before, was having a serious impact on resources and the environment and infrastructure here. You know, it's like the roads aren't wide enough, there aren't enough of them, water's an issue, electricity sometimes with the brownouts and things like that. So the idea of reigniting Bali's tourism industry, you know, it's certainly going to happen. How it happens is yet to be seen, but you're hopeful that it's going to do something.
I think too, in addition to possibly health tourism, longer stays, there's a lot of activity around communities, which is a big international trend. People want to live in different types of communities where there's a sense of belonging, some shared values, and, you know, possibly also business aspects and so on. And there's a lot of developers and groups coming together already building these different types of communities, and they're all much more, again, sustainable, eco-friendly, and some of these projects, some of the larger ones that I've been exposed to over the last few months too, they're actually driven and motivated by the Balinese to set, their sort of concept into a community and then invite the foreigners to come in and take part in it, which to me is really exciting.
Yeah.
You have the foreigners coming in and doing whatever they do, and a lot of those are good. Some of them may not fit totally with culture and so on, but that's a different challenge, I guess. But that's really encouraging to see, and they want it to be ecological, they want it to be sustainable, they want it to be in balance with their own culture, and that I think people will come to experience and be part of.
Interestingly enough, I was having a conversation I think towards the end of last week about it was related to the concept of the 10 new Balis, and what are the tourist destinations across Indonesia are being highlighted for development and for sort of exposure to a more global market, and in fact more of a domestic market as well, I guess. But one of the things that came up in this conversation was Labuan Bajo and the potential that Labuan Bajo has got for a particular sort of tourism industry and that sort of thing. And one of the things that we were talking about was how places like Labuan Bajo could learn from the mistakes that were made in Bali, because we, as beautiful as it is, it's still, number one on a whole bunch of travel platforms as a place to come to. It made mistakes. Bali did make mistakes.
Definitely,
it almost grew too fast and
out of control, not regulated.
Exploded a little bit. Do you see that there is opportunity in places like Labuan Bajo for investment and for doing a better job than was done here?
Yeah, I think the sort of 10 new Balis, they still have that, and there's also new areas coming on with different types of special economical zones set for tourism. But the government has also then focused on what they call the 5 super destinations, and one of them is Labuan Bajo, Mandalika, Borobudur, Lake Toba. But if we use Labuan Bajo as an example, I think it sort of inherited some of the mistakes that Bali did, in the sense that a lot of expats and also locals went in and bought up land left, right, center without necessarily having any thoughts other than, I'm going to gain a lot of money on this and sell it out, and some were doing good, genuine projects. And then again, the government need some time then to catch up, and we see now that some of these areas that expat has bought is actually forest areas, protected areas, not clear titles and so on, and so there's a bit of fuss and sort of, the Indonesian government, they don't want us, they're messing around with us, which is not the case. It's always been the forestry area, and it will be for the future. So they're just saying that you can invest, but you gotta follow regulations and do your homework. But you can see in Labuan Bajo too, the government, they focus on the infrastructure, the airport, the international terminal, extensions, harbors, they're building out for yacht activities, marinas, hotels.
The yachting and marine industry, I think, in a place like Labuan Bajo is massive.
Yeah, and over the last few weeks, through some of our Jakarta contacts, we've seen now a huge area that will be kind of like in Nusa Dua, in the sense that it'll be a large area with hotels and villas and so on being built, and including another marina. But they are very set on doing this fully ecological, fully self-sustained, with energy, solar panels, whatever it is, recirculation of waters, blend with nature, not upset too much, and one aspect too, then a massive digital capacity, so that people working from home, digital nomads and so on, can tap into a structure, and I think that'll take off. And
the digital nomad issue or question is actually a very interesting one. I know we've discussed it before, and the opportunity that there was to issue like a digital nomad visa, so that people working from home, if you want to call it digital nomads, were sort of in a more legal in a more legal structure to actually be here. But recently, like in the last few days, we've read reports of how immigration are going to start to look at these digital nomads in terms of them earning money, not paying taxes. You know, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is that too much? Is that too much government control?
I think it's a combination of maybe a little bit of different messages depending on what department and institution you talk to. It's clear that Indonesia wants to encourage digital nomads to come here, you know, work from home, and through that too, like we do, we try to encourage them to set up, you know, a company in Indonesia, simply because it's the right thing to do, but also that it has a lot of benefits, you know, tax-wise. You know, you will struggle to find better countries in terms of tax benefits than Indonesia.
What would you explain that a little bit further? Because the idea of a digital nomad, in my head at least, is that you don't have a company. It's that you're free to wander the world and do what you want. But so what do you mean about setting up a company?
So I guess that, like a digital nomad, they'll have some businesses. They'll do some work for, you know, different companies that run their own businesses, and they can do that. I think it's close to impossible to sort of enforce anything on that with the government. I don't think they want to. Let's say you make some money, you get paid to do some online work, or you know, a business that you have in Europe or US or whatever, and you receive the money in here and you spend it on you know, living and eating and drinking and, you know, your lifestyle. But I think what the immigration is addressing is that they're tapping into businesses here. They're you know, running different types of, again, communities or Airbnb or whatever it is, and they're not registered. And there's a lot of aspects of that. It kind of discourage people to be in compliance if they don't do it. Companies in compliance do get the work permits, they pay taxes and so on. And I also think it has to do a little bit with protection to local labor that gets dragged into this, and they don't get, you know, the pension funds and the security and insurance and so on that is part of it. So I think sometimes the expat community takes it a little bit out of proportions, and it's fair that Indonesia looks at how they can discipline, you know, people that want to live here. They encourage people to come, and they do all the right things in terms of regulations, sometimes maybe not in all people's eyes the best possible way, but that, you know, is coming. But on the other side too, they have to, right? They have to discipline, you know, less what's the right word? People and persons that tries to take advantage of it.
Yeah. And then, you know, earlier we were just talking there about the digital potential of Indonesia domestically. I think a lot of people would associate digital nomads with foreigners, but there's got to be a large domestic pool of digital nomads too, right? I mean, it's not just a foreign thing. I mean, there's a lot of young kids here that can do that job.
No, I think you're right, and I think that we've talked about this over the last 10, 15 years, probably maybe 20 years, that the domestic market in any shape or form is larger than any foreign market. You know, the perception that a foreigner spends more than locals, I don't think that's true. If a person from Jakarta moves in here, they'll buy a villa, they'll, you know, send their kids to school, whatever. It's a similar aspects of both markets has their role to play. But I think clearly the domestic market is dominant, and I think we see that in, you know, demand for lifestyle. You know, the sort of Jakarta, Surabaya crowds, they want what we want in terms of lifestyle. They want, you know, good lives and a little bit of fun and, you know, a good vibe and environment. And certainly on digital nomads too, there's a massive amount of them in Jakarta, Bandung, these places, and they come into Bali and they meet like-minded people, expats, so you get that blend into it. And you can see also companies through COVID, and the government has encouraged people to work from Bali. So the same aspect, not necessarily coming from Singapore or, you know, Europe or whatever, but actually say, if you're in Jakarta and you can't go to the office, go to Bali and work from Bali.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you know, when COVID first hit, that certainly was something that you were reading about in sort of Jakarta-based press. was that the idea of work from home. So you don't come into the office, work from home, and the idea was, well, home can be wherever you lay your hat, right? It could be in downtown Kemang, or it could be in Canggu, you know.
No, I think the Jakarta crowd too has discovered that, you know, when there has been lockdowns or restrictions, it's obviously a lot better to sit in a villa in Bali than a tiny little apartment in Jakarta. You can go out and stretch your legs in the garden, and maybe even out on the beach. While in Jakarta you're locked up in an apartment. So obviously that's encouraging.
The villa market is actually something that we're kind of interested in, you know, either long-term leases or selling villas and that. Do you see that as being sustainable in the sense of, we don't necessarily want to build more villas, but we want to use them in a different kind of way, you know, different sorts of markets using the properties? What are your thoughts on that?
I guess what I see and think will happen is that we'll see, coming out of COVID now, a lot of people that want to move here and live here, so that the residential villa aspect may actually be better than ever. Hopefully that audience coming in is more conscious and more eco-concerned, and they'll demand to be in properties that comply with certain standards of renewable energy, recirculated water, and so on. I think it's inevitable that number of villas and properties will continue to grow, but I also think that certain areas and qualities of the villas and what they deliver is not good enough, and we'll see a lot of land value transactions where people will buy a property and knock down the existing property and rebuild it. Yeah, I think that's inevitable. Areas all the way from Kuta, possibly up to areas like Canggu. Further up, I think now there's a lot more thought into what people built and how they built. So hopefully that continues. But I think that's inevitable too. That change has to come.
With that, actually, that's interesting, because we're going to do later on today. We're going to do another interview with the real estate guys to talk about the difference between leasehold and freehold, and traditionally the leasehold and freehold thing were very much kind of in pockets. It was freehold for domestic buyers and leasehold for foreign buyers. Do you see there being a shift in the sense that a domestic market is going to be sort of more interested or more inclined to think about long-term leases? I think that in the past it's been impossible to convince an Indonesian to buy a lease, simply because their whole mindset is set on asset and full ownership. They discover now that some of these areas they can't get freehold or title, so they have to lease. Why not?
Because there is just not anything available, and the locals or whoever sits on these titles, they don't need to sell. They can run their businesses leasing it out long term, and it continues for generations, I guess, forward. So that's one aspect. Yeah, we do see Indonesians are open to buy into long-term leases, but you also see then foreigners that, rather than the sort of old ghost of nominee structures and so on, is actually ending, and they'll buy into setting up a company, HDB title, or they're retirees and they do a hakpakke title. And I think now with this second tax amnesty, and hopefully the last nominee structures out there, people realize they have to get rid of this. They have to get out of these structures and be in compliance. And similar
how easy is that to do? Because I mean, we come across a lot of people that have issues with nominee structures, right? But how do you actually get out of that cycle?
Well, you have to obviously set up a company and take the property into a company. That has some tax implication, because in the eyes of the government, the nominee is selling it to the PMA. So you have a buyers and seller tax that everyone is not happy with. But I think from a security perspective and long-term business, that is much better for anyone to do, to sustain their business and operate it in a proper way. Because the government, they'll know there is a nominee, there is a beneficial owner, and they'll start looking at both of them as tax object and subject. And I think the same thing will happen on lease. Now lease, the government is saying we would want those registered with the Agrarian Office, PPN, and if you buy a long lease, you have to have a residential status. You cannot just walk in from the street on a social visa or tourist visa and say, I want to be here for 25 years.
You have to have a key test?
That has been enforced and stated in latest regulations, that long-term leases, that you have to have a residential status, which means a Kitas,
Right. And with that, you know, when we were talking earlier about the Airbnb, we just very briefly touched on that. We were looking, you know, as you know, we were looking at a site called AirDNA, which is the sort of the backbone of Airbnb, and it gives you lots of data. And there's something like 46,000 villas on Airbnb. We're not, you know, I don't necessarily want to go down the rabbit hole of how many of them are legal or not, because we've actually written quite a lot about that before. But like Airbnb, to a degree, is like an OTA. Sort of. And there are a lot of OTAs here that a lot of villas depend on, a lot of hotels depend on these OTAs, you know, booking.com and the likes of those. Is there the possibility, or at least the potential, for the domestic market to forget about these OTAs and develop their own version of that doesn't charge as much money, that actually gives more money back to the villa owners, and therefore the price is going to be cheaper for the guys that are renting the properties out? So it's actually a win-win-win if it moves away from that.
I think that you know, in good and bad, the dependency on booking engines is there, and it's an easy way to sort of get out to the market. I think it's also a dangerous way to go, because you forget about your quality and sort of branding and how you stand out in the market. So I think for us, we would encourage people then to sort of work on your deliverables in the villa or the boutique resort or whatever it is.
Service aspect.
Yeah, because then people will, next time they don't need to go through the Airbnb. I think though that Bali is in a unique position to deal with that animal if they could get some kind of understanding across the industry between the travel agencies, the hotel owners, operators, villa owners, and so on, to create their own booking engine, because they have the databases. Everyone has data, so you can reach out. Let's say you do a weekly newsletter or something like that people can receive and get, again, then balanced news. You're not being hammered by, you know, the Channel 9s and the, you know, whatever international news that likes to black paint the picture when there's events going on there, or happenings going on. And with that, you could give back then to the stakeholders of that, so that would reduce, one, the fees that you pay, two, you're kind of like an owner of this booking engine, and three, that could have, you know, a social cause, or, you know, a fund set aside for those less fortunate in Bali and possibly beyond.
Well, what's kind of interesting about that concept of the experience and the growing trend of experiential travel is that, you know, people are more inclined, I think, to experience and involve themselves in the local area, the local communities, more than they would normally do, which in a sense is kind of spreading the wealth. Do you know, it's not like, here I am staying in a 5-star hotel, the majority of that money is going to go to the international hotel chain. Sure, there's good salaries for the people that work there, and they get good service charges and stuff, but in terms of like impacting the local community, I think the idea of experiential travel with villas or complexes is quite exciting.
No, I think we've talked about this to different government institutions too, that the figures of where the money sort of goes, there is massive, you know, 6 million expats, 9 million domestic travelers, you know, average room rates, and so on and so on. But where that money goes and how it sort of impacts the local economy to its fullest potential, I think is nobody really knows, and it's not really measured in any way, but I don't think it's particularly good or high. And I think that these changes that people come in and take benefits of smaller communities, and, you know, they live closer to the you know, existing villages and structures that the Balinese has set up, the impact will be much more direct. So like in the examples we talk about, let's say an expat family comes in, they got a couple of kids, they'll send it to an international school, they'll rent an expensive villa, they'll buy a car, they'll hire locals. They might also bring a small business, being consultants in, you know, somewhere in Europe, and they bring that in and start billing clients from here. And then you're looking at a couple with 2 kids suddenly have a impact to the local economy, very direct, with maybe, you know, 2-3 billion a year. And that when you start looking at some studies done internationally in similar or places in similar situations, it's mind-blowing. Like I think we looked at the Canary Islands or something like that, who figured out that if they didn't get the 15 million tourists, they needed something like 150,000 people to move there and live there, and they would have the same impact. And I think Bali is in a position where they can drive that and also still get the tourism, but afford to drive a more sustainable tourism, quality tourism.
All right, so let's close with talking a little bit about Jakarta. We've opened a branch office in the CBD in Jakarta. That's almost like it's a different sort of focus to the one that we've got here in Bali. Do you want to walk us through a little bit of what goes on in Jakarta and the significance of all of these agreements and understandings that you've signed up with foreign companies and domestic organisations? Yeah,
I think the Jakarta move for us is long overdue, and obviously been overdue because of COVID. But one, we sort of step up to handling large companies that want to enter into Indonesia, typically within maritime, energy, whatever it is, and a lot of these will be Nordic, even though we're open to work with any companies. What we're trying to say to these companies is that we know that entering into a new market is a substantial move financially, so they can then come to us, have a setup with us, share some staff. We can do introduction to projects, to potential partners, and so on. And once things are gaining momentum, they can then consider to set up on their own or stay with us.
Right.
And with that, we do a lot of work towards private companies in Indonesia, government institutions, provinces, and so on, to try to identify what's out there in terms of potential. And right now, it's a lot to do with energy. It's a lot to do with mining developments, fishery and maritime, another big thing. So that's happening. But also on the other side of it, I think that there are a lot of Bali-based businesses who doesn't have a representation in Jakarta, and they can have that through us, so they can expose themselves to a larger market, again, the domestic market.
How can they have that with us? What do you
mean? we offer different solutions. They can have a set chair and a desk. We can help them recruit people, whether they're selling, I don't know, a boutique hotel or a beach club or whatever it is, or we can operate that for them. So we have quite a substantial office in Kuningan in Noble House, and the idea with that, and we'll do the first one now together with Indonesia Expat in February, that we will run a lot of events to encourage Jakarta market to come into to Bali, and then the Balinese businesses and possibly Lombok and Flores as well, to have a foothold and an exposure. Maybe they're looking for investors, maybe they're looking for partners, whatever it is. And I think in some way too that there might actually be Jakarta businesses who get exposed to us in Jakarta, needing a foothold also in Bali, but they might not necessarily want to set up a full office, so they can then take advantage of our network here in Bali, which is now 4 offices, and obviously our main office here in Seminyak, but we have branch offices in Canggu, Uluwatu, and Ubud as well.
So, do you think in terms of Seven Stones Indonesia, do you think Jakarta is a game changer?
I think it takes us to a different level and a slightly different number of services and what we do and not. But I think through the whole growth of Seven Stones and what we've done well over the last few years is that we don't necessarily look at someone with a sort of dollar sign in our eyes. We sort of come in first to try to create networks, create value to people, and then the business kind of follows. I think that can happen on the scale that we've seen here in Bali with smaller and medium-sized companies setting up to now on a large scale too. And I think we're gaining a very, very good momentum in Jakarta where more and more companies and the sort of embassies and so on are waking up to that, that we're providing a good value for anyone wanting to come in.
There's actually a lot of stuff to do with embassies. in Jakarta, right? There's a lot of the Nordic embassies.
We work closely with all the Nordic embassies, in particular Norway, because I'm from Norway, but also the Finnish embassy, who we now have a setup, and we actually have companies established in Norway and Finland to be able to take that to the next level too, and reach out to these companies. And
I really like the idea of kind of this cross-exchange thing that we've been working on. So yes, there's the opportunity for foreign companies and businesses to use our services and facilities for market entry and all that sort of stuff. But I'm really also interested in the idea of a local business or a local company expanding its reach out to foreign places, but also to expand its reach domestically. So the relationship that we've developed with Oche, for example, which encourages local entrepreneurship. I think that's great, because it gives opportunities for maybe foreign companies to share their expertise with a local company or a local startup. And how do you make it better? How do you make it work better?
Yeah, I think it's got to do with knowledge. It's got to do with understanding of different markets. It's got to do with technology and so on and so on. But I think, like we talked about before too, Oche, BKPM and the different ministries all have this big move into small, medium-sized enterprises, and the reason for that is simple. 60% of Indonesia's economy is driven by small, medium, and micro, businesses and activities. More than 90% of the labor force is living off it. So, for a company like us or any company coming into Indonesia, that to me is just a natural process. If you enhance those, you enhance yourself, and everything sort of comes together.
So, summing up, yes, tough couple of years. The future, is it bright?
Well, I think definitely for Indonesia, and I think also for the world, we've learned a lot. There's some big geopolitical sort of threats happening around. It always is, and we should rather focus on what we can do and how we can do good and do well for where we are. Future of Indonesia, absolutely. I think it's hitting a massive tipping point, and that it'll hit that sort of golden age next 10, 20 years that we can all be part of and be proud of and push in the right direction.
Okay. Terje,
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Sama-sama.